Chapter 1: Early Explorations of an Autistic Disorder. Leo Kanner, the first English-speaking psychiatrist who wrote about autism, considered it a biological issue. He examined his patients and their parents to learn specific patterns and symptoms of the disorder. Later on, he changed his opinion and wrote that the disorder had roots in the psychological field. Another researcher who examined autism was Austrian pediatrician Hans Asperger. He listed specific symptoms that come with the disorder, and the scientific community started to recognize autism more often. Kids who had resembling symptoms, like shyness or excessive enthusiasm about one subject, could be diagnosed with autism disorder even though they didn't have it. With the development of MRI and neurobiology, scientists started to understand which parts of the brain could be broken, causing an autistic disorder. If something's broken in the brain, you can really start to learn what the various parts do. Temple Grandin. Neurology has to explore the human brain when it doesn't work right to realize which part of it is responsible for our language skills, diverse emotions, memory, and so on. For example, if a person traumatizes the back part of their head, they will most likely experience vision disturbances because the visual cortex is at the back part of the brain. However, an autistic disorder does not entail a broken brain. Some of its parts just don't grow right. After her MRI, Grandin realized that her cerebellum was smaller than a normal brain, resulting in weak coordination. Grandin's MRI also showed that her amygdalae were increased. Since they are responsible for working with emotions, particularly fear, Grandin had acute anxiety throughout her life. One more impressive finding was made by Grandin when the researchers checked her visual cortex activation in comparison to a person without an autistic disorder. When looking at pictures with faces and other subjects, Grandin's brain didn't activate the same way as another person's brain when doing the same. People with autistic disorders do not strive for human contact. Their brain is not activated enough when they see a human face. This summary will reveal the real nature of autistic people. We are used to perceiving them as little children who don't understand much about the world. The truth is that people with an autistic disorder are as intelligent as individuals who don't have it. You will observe how autistic people think about themselves and how their brain works. Chapter 2: Different Types of Sensory Perceptions in Autistic People. While trying to identify the biological patterns of an autistic disorder, scientists paid attention to DNA copy number variations, or CNVs. They hoped to find specific genetic mutations that were responsible for autism development. The researchers noticed that there existed numerous CNVs possibly linked to an autistic disorder. The problem was that different types of mutations connected to autism were not encountered more than twice. Kids with an autistic disorder had distinct mutations in distinct genes. Another issue is that autism shares specific mutations with other disorders, including epilepsy and schizophrenia. So behaviors that occur during an autistic disorder also frequently coincide with behaviors inherent to people with different diagnoses. Later, scientists were able to identify which CNVs were responsible for an autistic disorder. Much of the significant revelations was that the father's age influenced the probability of autism development in the child. Sperm cells divide every 15 days, more or less, so the older a father is, the greater the number of mutations in his sperm. Temple Grandin. As a result, the more mutations are produced, the bigger the probability that one of the mutations will cause an autistic disorder. However, researchers examined whether one mutation could move the development of specific autistic-like characteristics forward, or whether there had to be several mutations responsible for one characteristic. From her own experience, Grandin noticed that frequently in a family with an autistic child, One parent had a light type of autism conduct. If the child had a severe form of autism, there was a high possibility that both parents had a more prevalent type of autistic conduct. People with an autistic disorder also have sensory processing issues. Grandin herself described how extremely uncomfortable she felt when someone popped balloons or dried hands in a hand dryer. She divided such people into 3 groups. Individuals who want to have more sensations than the average person and will constantly search for loud noises, for instance. Individuals who try to avoid diverse situations and won't, for example, eat a specific food because its smell will be too sharp for them. People who do not react to any stimuli and don't care about loud noises despite their good hearing. Some of them may even ignore pain. Researchers later expanded these categories by adding that the first group is inattentive, the second has low muscle tone, and the third can have acute smell or taste. Grandin points out that scientists should not exclude self-reports from their research projects. For example, a boy with an autistic disorder shared that the doctor told his parents that he lacked understanding of the surrounding world. But the boy understood everything. He just could not talk. A stereotypical view of people with an autistic disorder is that they are like in a parallel reality. However, they clearly realize what is happening around them. Chapter 3. Concentration on limitations impedes self-development. Scientists developed a test that can show whether a person has an autistic disorder. However, Grandin says that even high test scores do not necessarily indicate that one is autistic. Yet people still want to name those who have an autistic disorder and those who scored high but don't have an autistic disorder. She calls this requirement label-locked thinking. Such a type of thinking may harm a person's self-development. For instance, a doctor says that a patient has an autistic disorder, and a person starts to think about limitations instead of possibilities to improve. They may decide in advance that nobody will hire them, and even if a person doesn't feel limited by doctors' diagnoses, they might start worrying about their image from others' perspectives. What is even more damaging about label-locked thinking is its impact on therapy. If an autistic patient has problems with their digestive system in the context of autism, a doctor may abandon treating gastrointestinal issues and focus on autism. However, why ignore such a problem that is curable, by the way? This is a brilliant example of how harmful label-locked thinking is. Just because gastrointestinal problems are common in people with autism doesn't mean that the GI problems are untreatable on their own. Temple Grandin. However, people with an autistic disorder cannot perceive the world the same as those without the condition do, and doctors cannot help them. Studies have shown that autistic individuals were better at recognizing inverted pictures and worse at observing motion than a control group. Autistic individuals focus on separate parts of the moving object, while others see it as a whole. The autistic brain is also more capable of associative thinking. Grandin explained that she doesn't store typical explanations of how the world works in her mind. Instead, she explores the subjects every time because of her well-developed long-term memory. People with autistic disorder have weak short-term memories and rely on numerous memories collected in the distant past. So it stands to reason that associative thinking leads to greater creativity. Grandin exemplifies it through her practice of creativity by separating from the primary use of the object. Let's think about a brick and how we can apply it. Take a couple of minutes and list the things that you can do with a brick. Usually, people say that they can build a house or break something with its help. However, a brick's material can be used as a basis for paint, or you can change its form and apply it as a wheel. The key to creativity is restraining your focus on something's role in daily life and putting an object in an unusual environment. This type of thinking is inherent to people with an autistic disorder, while ordinary individuals put effort into its development. Thinking outside the box means forgetting the traditional ways of using some objects and creating new ones. Chapter 4.
You've hit a daily streak by completing 3 key points. Great job!
Patterns are everywhere around us, and our brains recognize them. While examining how the autistic brain works, Grandin noticed that people with an autistic disorder were better at recognizing patterns. For example, they like finding morphological correspondences, such as in the words elves and shelves. They detect such parallels not only in languages, but in all sciences. However, all people are prone to search for patterns around them. Let's consider Vincent van Gogh's famous painting, The Starry Night. As you may remember, it looks like numerous whirlpools. In 1930, scientists developed a turbulence formula and observed how the painting's patterns looked in liquid form and realized that Van Gogh's painting conveyed the look of turbulence very precisely. Another example of outstanding pattern observation happened in 2011 during the online game Fold It. The players didn't have an autistic disorder, but they demonstrated a great skill of pattern thinking. They had to find a composition of a specific enzyme, a task that hadn't been solved by scientists before. The participants, who, by the way, didn't major in biochemistry, managed to resolve the issue. By identifying patterns, you can solve numerous issues in your life. Researchers found that our brains strive to find patterns. They organized an experiment where the participants were shown different lines and had to indicate in what direction the lines tended to point. As a result, the participants were prone to thinking that the lines mostly extended more horizontally or vertically than they really did. Scientists considered that the brain follows such a pattern because we need to distinguish where the horizon moves properly and the vertical perspective of someone approaching us. The thing is that our universe is full of patterns. Sometimes we need to make an effort to recognize them. Otherwise, people naturally identify them. Grandin considered an incident with Jason Paget, who suffered severe trauma to his head. He started seeing patterns around him and perceiving everything as mathematical formulas. Even though he didn't deal with math training before, Jason was able to depict accurate math patterns in his art. Grandin also shared her perception of a world full of different objects. When asked what she saw in a certain painting, she visualized her mother's workbox. When asked what emotions this workbox evoked, Grandin realized that she didn't have any nostalgic feelings about this object. She saw something resembling this workbox because the object's shape in the painting reminded her of her mother's workbox. Grandin revealed that she could perceive the world through the eyes of an artist, but she couldn't feel the way the artists did. Her emotionality resembled a scientist's. She was more likely to use unemotional, descriptive words. This is a literal perception of the world. We can see the mathematical beauty of nature by recognizing numerous patterns hidden in it. Chapter 5. The brain behaves like a muscle. Fortune magazine published an article where the author claimed that one needs 10,000 hours of practice to become successful. The main idea was that you could succeed in anything by developing your skills for 10,000 hours. However, Grandin doesn't think that this is a correct assumption. She believes in talent that flourishes after 10,000 hours of practice. If a person doesn't have any natural abilities for a specific subject, even 1,000,000 hours of practice will not bring them success. Imagine that someone convinces you that you will be super successful in theoretical physics if you put in 10,000 hours of practice, even though you are a charismatic leader who loves developing business strategies and leading people. So you give up your business and plunge into theoretical physics. Unfortunately, you will more likely become very miserable because you will have to interact with formulas instead of people. It's just not your thing. As an autistic person, Grandin clearly understands that her brain isn't tuned for doing certain things. She has an underdeveloped cerebellum, which doesn't allow her to become a great skier. How do you think 10,000 hours of practice will help her? It's better to find out which skills you already have and apply them to your hobbies and professions. Search for your talent and practice in the sphere where your natural abilities fit the most. It will make you happy. However, all this doesn't mean that your brain cannot change at all. Earlier, scientists thought that a person's brain remains almost the same throughout one's life until they encountered neuroplasticity. A study of taxi drivers' brains demonstrated that their hippocampi were bigger than those of an ordinary individual. The hippocampus is responsible for navigation, and that's why the drivers developed it so well. The brain behaves like a muscle. Intellectual practices serve as its workout sessions. In some cases, a part of the brain that hasn't worked before can wake up, triggered by specific external factors. Researchers noticed that the more the drivers worked, the larger their hippocampi became. A subsequent study showed that after quitting the job, the driver's hippocampi returned to normal. People blind from birth perceive the world through the visual cortex. How is that even possible if they don't have any vision? This is a mystery of the brain. Orienting in space, the visual cortex somehow creates particular images of the environment in a blind person's mind so that they can navigate through streets and buildings. So the more we use a specific part of the brain, the more developed it becomes. Did you know? The human brain has a part that is responsible for speech production called Broca's area. Chapter 6. Education Limits Instead of Giving Possibilities. Thinking about the education of autistic children, Grandin regards how schools manifest that everybody should be treated equally. Let's consider this rule applied to the example of people with an autistic disorder. While on paper, this principle sounds fair, but the reality is not that simple. Allowing autistic children to study in the same classroom as children who don't have autism improves their socialization, but such treatment will emphasize who differs from whom. Ordinary children will deprecate individuals with autism. A better way to treat such kids lies in recognizing their strengths and focusing on them. For instance, Grandin's high school teacher noticed her exceptional thinking in terms of mechanics and helped her hone those skills. However, he put too much effort into teaching her algebra, and Grandin's brain was not developed for such an abstract subject. However, she was great in geometry, so she suggested that the teachers shift their attention from the subjects at which an autistic student cannot succeed to those where they would fully advance. One of the parents attending Grandin's lectures expressed concern about her autistic daughter. She said that her child couldn't bear loud sounds in the school dining room, so the principal allowed her to dine in an isolated lounge. A parent was upset because the principal separated her daughter from the other kids. Grandin said it was a perfect solution in such a situation, and her daughter's needs were met. Grandin insists on developing autistic kids' strong points. For example, one school wanted to deprive a boy with an autistic disorder of art. He was exceptionally talented, but due to his extreme enthusiasm about the subject, the school considered it not normal. Grandin suggested to work with his talent instead of attempting to make somebody else from him, especially the one he, most likely, will never be able to become, like a mathematician or doctor. She suggests that autistic children who are great picture thinkers will make wonderful artists and other professionals connected to art. Concentrate on your strengths, and your talent will develop to its highest. Modern education impedes the natural development of kids' talents, and it doesn't only concern individuals with an autistic disorder. Both ordinary and autistic students suffer from school limitations. Grandin shared a story where she was at the processing plant where diverse robots were presented. She inquired about who developed the machines, and a worker said that these were people from India and China. When she wondered why there were no Americans, A worker said that the U.S. educational system failed to ensure that children would advance in engineering and programming skills. Conclusion: an autistic disorder doesn't mean that a person cannot perform numerous tasks which ordinary people can easily do. Autistic people are smart, and they understand everything that happens around them, although they may seem that they don't. An autistic disorder is caused by specific biological differences in one's brain in the process of its development. When Grandin had an MRI of her brain, she noticed that her amygdalae were increased, meaning that she felt anxiety much more acutely than an ordinary person. However, autistic people are better at recognizing patterns in the world. It helps them construct an outstanding image of the environment in which they live so that they can see specific features faster than other people. Considering their sensory abilities, scientists revealed that autism results in decreased brain activation when autistic people see faces. What parents of autistic kids regard as unwillingness to communicate is actually the child's inability to react emphatically to the object of communication. The brain is a highly adaptive organ. Neuroplasticity suggests that we are able to strengthen our skills, thus changing the brain's size. As in the case of taxi drivers, their constant practice of space orientation led to the increase of the hippocampus. But don't be alarmed. Such changes do not harm our health. They help us reinforce specific habits. Practice is key, that's true, but not in all cases. When you force yourself to develop professionalism in the sphere that doesn't inspire you, or your brain is well developed in another field, even hundreds of hours of practice won't help. But this is great because you get the chance to do what you and your brain love. Try this. 1. Train your brain with memory games. Good memory reduces instances like when you know you have read an interesting fact about a topic you discuss with your friends, but you just can't remember it. Isn't that annoying? 2. Watch educational videos on YouTube on more than one topic of interest. Choose National Geographic Channel for culture and nature exploration, and Veritasium for scientific facts. Your brain will be grateful for a broadened knowledge horizon. 3. Read more books and long articles to break the habit of focusing only on short texts. You will notice how your concentration improves with time.